I think the thing that struck me was just the rustic character of it, the mounding, the obviously the proximity to the water. Number three is, a hole that is justifiably famous. And I think back then, one of the key takeaways was that the golf course was so heavily treed. I mean, you were out on the point, and you were playing like 2 and 17, and coming up 16, you couldn't even see the water. And between 1 and 18 was heavily treed. So there was, if I could be so bold at such a young age, it was, I was hoping that they would take our recommendations with tree removal. It was really the first and most, I think, lasting impression. And thankfully, 25 years later, we're not finished, but we've come a long way. We were still under the belief that Frederick Hood was the designer, and he was obviously one of the founding members and was the guy who was out there. And William Flynn, very famous architect, obviously Cherry Hills and Shinnecock Hills and on and on. His name was just sort of whispered as well, may have had some help, but that Frederick Hood was the one who actually implemented and did the design. And then in the subsequent years, I think it was sometime in the early 2010s or late 2008, 2009, we found Flynn's drawings. So that caused a big sea change, if you will, right in the middle of the 25 years we've been working there. So the initial thought was just to do the best we could with what was there, not really imagining any alterations or significant changes to the golf holes, with the exception of tree removal, but basically shifting and reversing some of the evolution that had occurred on the golf course. And then after we found the Flynn plans, it became a little bit more clear that there were some bunkers that had been taken out or that weren't built. And so we felt like we could possibly push the envelope a little bit more with making recommendations. A lot of what we looked at Kittansett was, and some of the most recent work was to try to move some of the features downrange so that they would be in the proper location for players that are going to compete in the Massachusetts Amateur. And I think by stretching the golf course and pushing those features downrange, they would sort of fall out of the range of most of the average golfers at the club. So I think it opens up the opportunity to make the golf course a little bit more playable. The green expansions as well, trying to get the greens to be a little bit bigger, in some instances a little bit more receptive, also helps. And I think we've also looked at sort of widening and opening up approaches down. They basically narrowed in front of the greens, and they weren't necessarily as wide as the openings, which would be a much more traditional presentation of a golf course. So we widened a lot of the approaches, which allows balls to run onto the greens, which is certainly more favorable for the average golfer. So a lot of it, well, not a lot of it, all of it's at the direction of the client and the club. So whatever they decide, if they want to take 25 years to do it, we go at it very slowly, and we do what we can, as the finances come. We're very fortunate working right now at Baltusrol and on Lower, and then Oakland Hills South, and they basically shut both golf courses down and just blown them up and putting them all back together. So they'll be out of play for close to 18 months. And obviously they've had the luxury of having 36 holes, so they still have 18 holes available for the membership. So it really could be one or the other, Stephen. It's either, you go in and you knock it all out and you're done, or you slowly but surely pick at it. And then I think the way you go about it over a longer term is you prioritize what's the most important. And then you do it in a way that makes economics sense as well as is efficient. So it's, generally speaking, a hole by hole approach. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like all the front nine or all the back nine. It's just sort of clusters of golf holes. And then you look at it that way. And a lot of what's happened at Kittansett has been under the very capable stewardship of John Kelly, the golf course superintendent. And so some of these mowing patterns, all it takes is like an annual visit and go and paint something out, and then he'll slowly but surely convert it down to fairway turf or approach turf. And same thing with tree removal. We'll mark the trees, and then over the winter months, he'll take care of it. So there's no right way or wrong way to do it. And I would say that the way Kittansett's approached it has just been sort of with an eye towards the long term and just slowly peeling away at it. I think it's unique in that, most times you you think about seaside golf courses or courses with that sort of proximity to a big body of water, and they tend to be on the sandier side. And this Hanse is not, with the exception of holes out on the point, it's sort of very rocky, very heavy soil. So the playable characteristics, the way the grass grows, sort of can be very lush and thick versus very sort of thin and wispy. And I think that that's evident as well. And probably one of the more unique features is the mounding at Hanse, where you've got, basically when they're building the golf course, they collected so many rocks that they just piled them up underneath those mounds and then covered them over with dirt, as opposed to trying, in that day and age, they had mules and, wagons pulling. They didn't have bulldozers or excavators or that sort of thing. So it was all sort of functional, practical methodology, but it shows you a little bit the difficulty of the site. It's not an easy site. It's a beautiful one. I think the one that it probably reminds me the most of would be another course we worked at, is Sakonnet over in Rhode Island. I think it has a very similar sort of heavier soil, but the proximity to the water is the same, and they have some really cool kind of quirky mounding, but it's very, very effective. I've always liked 6. I think, the routing of the golf course is such that you kind of go away, you start off on the ocean or Buzzards Bay, and then you work away, and then you come back to it out on number 6. And I think the mounding is really unique and has a lot of character to it. And the way the green sits out on that peninsula, it's a beautiful setting. I've always liked number 10. 2 of the holes we've recently altered, but a short par 4, I think it really works out quite nicely. And I think 15, it's one of the par 5s, I think has been a really, really cool hole with the way Flynn utilizes cross rough in areas, and we've restored some of it to the golf course, but it's an interesting concept and sort of, okay, here's the end. You can't hit it past here, whether it's off the tee and it's something to negotiate. And I think a lot of it comes from his experience at Pine Valley. Having been involved there, there's certain areas of cross rough at Pine Valley that not a lot of people talk about. Normally you talk about Hell's Half Acre and the big sandy expanses, but there are a few holes, number 4, number 9, that come to mind that have this cross rough running across. So I think that's an interesting characteristic of the course. So yeah, I think 6, 10, 15 are some of my favorites. I think we're going to see how this tournament goes, and you guys so thank you for hosting it, and also hopefully the standard of play, I'm sure, will be fantastic. And it's, you set up a golf course, and obviously it's a members club first and foremost, and we want it to be playable and enjoyable for the members. But when you bring an event of this stature to it, you're always curious to see how are the best players in the state of Massachusetts and in the Northeastern or in New England, how are they going to play the golf course? And so I think we'll be really curious to see how they tackle some of the issues. I think one of the bigger things that's been on our plate for a longer period of time are green expansions and kind of finishing those off and working so that the tightly mown turf around the greens is really can play firm and hard and fast. And, what do we have to do to create those sort of playing conditions around the greens? So, and then it seems like we're always messing around with the trees out there to kind of, number one, improve the agronomy, improve the sight lines, and help with giving the golf course a little bit of room to breathe. But I think if we can, long term focus in on the greens themselves, get those expansions right, get them playing firm and fast, and get the surrounds really tightened up, I think that would be probably be the final touch that we need out there. All right, so the risk reward holes. I think that I'm delighted it's match play, because I think that's the best form of golf. I think the hole that immediately pops to mind is 17. For the length that these guys can hit it, I think if a match gets that far, it's a great opportunity for some of the longer hitters can even drive that green, depending on the wind condition. Generally it's into the wind, but if for some reason you get a different wind, and the way they can play that hole with the creek down at the bottom of the hill, it's difficult to see, where you're trying to hit it. So I think it's a really strategic and a sort of course knowledge, local knowledge type golf hole. So I think 17 is a critical one. I think as you go around the back, 13 is another one where a long player could really try and hit it down that right-hand side and flirt with the roadway, try and carry a lot of those trees. We've lengthened the golf hole, but still it's, for that class of player, it's definitely, there's a real aggressive line down the right-hand side with all the hazards and the boundary. and then a much easier, safer way to play it out to the left-hand side. So I'd be curious to see, if you're 2 up with 5 or 6 holes to play, do you play conservative? And does the other guy feel like he's really got to push the advantage? So I think those are 2 on the backside that I think will be critical. I think number 7, anytime par 5s are always 7 and 15 are going to be crucial from the standpoint of getting it in the fairway, which will allow you to take a chance to go for it. And they play in opposite directions, so one of them will probably be downwind, one will be into the wind. So I think those will be, the more interesting holes, and see how they play those. If there's a heavy wind out there, then 3 is going to be 3 is just such a beautiful hole, but it's so visually intimidating. And if you get a howling wind across that golf hole, it brings the water much more into play. But the other part of it is, you knock it onto the beach and you get in somebody's footprint. And so there are a lot of things that are very natural part of that golf hole that I think could add to the frustration levels out there. 14 has got the really tiny bunker right in front of it. So if it generally plays downwind, you could, see some players in there, and that could be a card wrecker as well. So, I think, obviously any hole could be troublesome if the wind really blows out there. And that's, every seaside golf course. It's not unique to Catanset. If the conditions under which they play, if it's dead calm and beautiful, they're probably going to shoot some really great numbers. If the wind blows like it can blow out there, then that's really a critical part of the defense of the golf course. Just knowing the state of amateur golf and the quality of players and how long, especially, I don't know how many times your championship's been won by a college player, but, it seems to be that's generally where things are going. And watching Bryce and what he's doing, and, players like to emulate each other. So it's probably, I would say, under windy conditions, Catanset is really a ball striker's course. You've really got to hit some quality second shots to get into those greens and to get yourself in position to score. If the wind lays down, it's going to be a bombers. It's going to be guys hitting short irons into those greens and getting close to hole locations. The greens are tricky good. They're not like severely sloped, but they're really subtle. So I think a golfer who can spend some time on the greens and get a little bit of a feel for them, get to understand them as best that they possibly can, is also going to have an advantage, because they're not, some greens have got such big slopes in them and they're kind of obvious how to putt them, even though they're challenging. These are just understated enough with just enough slope. They're based more on slope than undulation. So I think, a good intuitive putter is going to have success on those greens. Well, we had this conversation with some of the board members when I was there last, and Catanset will always be a very special place in my heart. And just, I get a certain excitement when you drive down Point Road. There's all these memories that come back of years and years ago of working out there and staying in the clubhouse, being the only one in the clubhouse. We were actually having this conversation last night. Somebody said, "What's the scariest clubhouse you've ever been in by yourself?" And I said, Catanset, because it's not winterized, and you're in there in October and the window, doors are blowing shut, and it's like, oh my gosh, just get through the night. So there's just so many great memories. Lenny Blodgett, who was the original superintendent who hired us, was one of the great characters we've ever worked with. So I've got, there's, for the longest time, Catanset meant fall to me, in the autumn, because I knew when autumn was coming around, we'd wind up at Catanset doing something or other, and the leaves would be changing, and it would be cold, and it was just this great feeling about going back to Catanset. And so it'll always be really special to us. It's basically launched, people taking us seriously from a restoration standpoint all those years ago. And so I can't ever thank them enough for picking us way back when.